Okay, guys, I'm not sure that this is the most appropriate topic for New Year's Eve. It's just a few hours from the New Year here in Vietnam. But lately I've just been thinking about it a lot, so I wanted to talk about my experiences with Islam, the religion Islam, and how I almost became a Muslim. So again, like I said at the beginning, I don't really see what this has to do with the new year, but it's been rolling around in my head for a few days, and usually when I have an idea like that, it means I have more to say about it, so I wanted to give it a shot. I have a very long history with Islam, in fact, but I would say that it began on September 11. That was the day. That was the day that I decided I was going to learn more about Islam to figure out what it was, and that's when I became inspired to do my own research, which lasted for a long time and really continues to this day. Only now I do my research as one who can safely say that I would never become a Muslim. And I have a lot of good reasons for that, and I can support that with the facts and with first-hand evidence that I acquired while living in Saudi Arabia. Why Islam? That was the name of the website that I went to, and this was I think it was my first year of college, and I was a freshman the year after the 1 year anniversary. This when I was starting college in northern Wisconsin, and I remember on that day we have a walk bridge, and so someone was passing out flower petals, and on a cue we all dropped them into the Chippewa River below. And dropping flower petals, one for each victim, you got to see how many people were lost. And there was talk about terrorism, there was talk about foreign policy. I was getting all kinds of messages. It was easy for me to take an anti-war stance, and this pushed me further to the left, I would say. It made me deeper in my liberalism at that time. But it left some unanswered questions about the attackers and the religious motives, to the extent that there were religious motives, and what this system of belief really was, and what made it different from Christianity or from any of the New Age stuff or from any Scientology or anything like that. I wanted to know more about it. It reminds me, like, I would talk about my interest with religions, and I've already gone into a lot of detail on this channel already, as akin to a New Yorker comic that I saw a few years ago. And in the comic, it's a professor and his students in an art gallery. And the professor is walking around studying all the paintings. And one of the students whispers to the other, he knows everything about art, but he has no idea what he likes. And hence, that's been sort of my relationship to religion, and that's why I've been pushed into the Universalist Society of Friends. And that's part of the struggle that I'm going through with just defining myself as a Christian, and to what extent that's inclusive of others. So anyway, after 9/11 and after that event, so it must have been the year anniversary of 9/11, I decided to, I found a website online, religioustolerance.org, that just went in great detail about all the world religions, and I began studying that just on my own without taking any classes about that or anything, just out of a spiritual searching on my own. And I found a site called whyislam.org, and they offered to send you a free English translation of the Quran. And so I signed up for it, and sure enough, and I remember it arrived appropriately on my birthday. It's one of those strange memories that you get, but it arrived on I think it was my 20th birthday. And I started reading it, and I was kind of interested, and quickly, I remember reading in the back of it, it said, this is a generous portion of the Quran. This will help you understand some of what's in it. And I learned right away the rule that if it's not in Arabic, then it can't really be called the Quran, which created some problems. Now, later on, I did learn a bit of Arabic, but I'll go into that later. But I read a few pages of it, I think, and I put it aside. And honestly, at that time, I was just as interested in New Age literature and Jehovah's Witness stuff and whatever I could get my hands on. I just found it to be interesting literature, even though I couldn't really commit to anything. And shortly after that, I think I found a copy of Science and Health, Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy, which put me in the direction of Christian Science. But that's another story. I'll do a video on that later. But because of that, yeah, I had just read a few pages of it, and I didn't think it was possible for me to become a Muslim. I still had questions about Westerners who did it. I didn't know anyone who was, and I didn't know how to become one. And I wasn't that interested because I knew it meant giving up a lot of things that I really enjoyed. And it meant making some really drastic changes to my life. Because at the very least, I knew about Cat Stevens. Well, fast forward a few years later. This is after I'm out of college, and there's a pizza joint near my house that my roommate is working at. And the owner is Egyptian. And I really like the food there, so I'm there every week. And one day I'm sitting there, and I see a man in traditional Muslim garb, and he's eating with his wife. And I asked him, I just flat out asked him, I don't know what possessed me. I said, "Are you a Muslim?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Can I talk to you?" And he looked Western. Yeah, he might have been Irish or something, or Irish blooded. He was an American kid. He was just like me. He was someone like me, and that's what really intrigued me about it. It's like, well, what is different about him? Why is he a Muslim? How did this message reach him? And what did he do about it? And he said to me, well, first he made his wife get up and go to the other tables. Or she didn't make her. She just naturally got up and went away. And I asked him about that, and he said, well, when two men are talking, the rule is for the woman to go to the other table. And so we're just abiding by that rule. That's what we do as devout Muslims. And I was fascinated by it. And I kept asking him questions. And he finally said, just come over to my house tomorrow, and we'll have dinner together, and we'll talk more. We'll talk more about Islam. And I agreed to that. And in the meantime, I had almost finished reading, so I finally tore through it. It's roughly the size of the New Testament or something. I forget exactly, but the translation I had, the Yusuf Ali, like standard translation, I finally got through it, and a lot of it I found repetitive, and the English translations are weak by nature, but that was a good translation, and it gave me some idea of what was happening. But studying the Quran alone, which I didn't figure out till later, doesn't really help you understand unless you read the Hadith as well. And the Hadith is it contains more of the rules for being a Muslim and more of the expectations. Little things that you don't, everything you would want to know about ablution and all that. It's really an evolved, intricate religion. Anyway, so I went to this man's house, and we sat on the floor and ate spaghetti, and it was fun. We just made small talk, and he showed me some resources. He showed me some websites and some books, and we were talking and talking and talking. And finally he says to me, so how about it? Are you ready to say the Shahada? There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet, which is the first pillar of the 5 pillars of Islam, which is what one needs to say in the presence of other Muslims to become Muslim. And I thought about it. I almost took the jump at that instant. I said, you know what? I need a day to think about it. And I said, I'll come back in one day, and I'll tell you my answer. And he said, mashallah, we'll see what happens. And I went home, and I very sincerely and earnestly prayed to God, just God, not Jesus or any manifestation of God that I had known, but just truth, the idea of truth itself, the self-evident true God that exists. And went to sleep with that prayer. And when I woke up in the morning, I thought about it again, and it was just very, very clear to me that I could not, under any circumstances, become a Muslim, and that's not what God wanted for me. I told him that later that day, and he was very upset. He was very, upset, I mean he was disappointed. And, like he was sad, like he had lost a soul. But I knew in my heart that it was right. And the night that I made that decision, more of the story is coming to me now. It was actually not still in Eau Claire where I was, but I had gone camping that weekend. So it was, I had met him to eat. He had offered to make me a Muslim by hearing me say the Shahada. And then I went camping on Lake Superior and under the stars with the cosmos and everything, just on my own, building a fire right on the shore of the Gitche Gumee, the biggest lake in the world. That's where I asked God. And that's where I believe that I got my answer, that I should not become a Muslim. But I was also a bit tortured by that, because so much of what I had studied about Islam seemed really, really fair, really good, really an improvement over Christianity in a lot of ways, beginning with their text. In terms of consistency and preservation over the years, because with the Islam you don't have to worry about American Standard Version, King James Version, Douay-Rheims. There's just one Quran, and it's the same Quran, and it always has been the same Quran. And we know where the body of Muhammad is, and we have details about his life, just like we have details about Buddha's life that we don't have really for the life of Jesus, which, supposing that he did rise from the dead, it makes sense that we wouldn't have like an exact burial spot. And there are places that claim it, but at least with Islam and with Buddhism, we know exactly where these relics are. Anyway, so fast forward a few years later, and this is after I got back from China, not long ago actually. And I just finished grad school, and I was living in China, and I came back to the States, and I lived in a few places. I didn't work. I was looking for jobs, and I wasn't quite sure what to do next. And I hesitated quite a bit, and I squandered a bit of my time, but also I was just recovering from being overseas again. And I thought, well, the money in Saudi Arabia sounds pretty good, and that would be nice to go there and try living there. And who knows, maybe actually it's time to give Islam another look. We'll take a look from up close this time. And this time, like in the month leading up to it, I studied Arabic quite a bit. And as a result, I was more equipped there than I had been for any other country, including Vietnam, in terms of being able to just read the language and communicate basically with people right away as soon as my plane touched down. Of course, there are more Arabic speakers just scattered throughout the world, and I wasn't just on my ass doing nothing at that time. Anyway, I got to Saudi and quickly picked up some English language literature, including a Quran with an English translation, and I began studying it and learning about the life there. And then I unfortunately came to realize that living there was just not for me, and that there were too many things wrong about it. And it came down to just me remembering my prayer and remembering the answer that God had given me, and trusting that I shouldn't question God at this point. Seeing it as a necessary experience to gain some money and then leave. But, I looked at Islam and I thought, the lack of music, the lack of women, the lack of fun, the lack of everything, and the fact that it was changing, and the fact that people were hypocritical about it, because as soon as you came home and turned on the TV, you would see all the same smut that's on American television. I thought, well, it's quite an ideal, it's quite something to strive for, but I'm not sure that this could ever be for me. But anyway, I could go on and more about theology and all these other things and interesting topics about Islam and my experiences in Saudi, which I hope I'll get to at some point. But we'll leave that be for now. Chuk Mung Nam Moi. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year 2018.